I'm Olivia Reed, 24 years old. And I've always believed that life writes the strangest stories when you're not paying attention. It all began one chilly evening in late October when I moved into a quiet neighborhood on the edge of town. The street was lined with maple trees whose leaves were turning shades of fire and gold. And the silence was almost too perfect. My new apartment was small but cozy, tucked just above a little bookstore that smelled of old paper and forgotten dreams. I was excited about this new chapter, about finding myself, about finally living alone. But I didn't know that the apartment next to mine carried a story I would never forget. The first time I saw him, Ethan Cole, he was standing in front of his door fumbling with his keys. Tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes so intense they almost seemed to hide entire oceans. He nodded politely when our eyes met, but there was something heavy in the way he moved, like every step cost him too much. I brushed it off as neighborly awkwardness, but that night, something happened that shook me to my core. I couldn't sleep, so I made tea and sat by my window overlooking the street. The clock struck midnight when I heard faint music coming through the wall. A piano, soft, broken, trembling notes. I pressed my ear closer, and that's when I heard it. A man's voice breaking into a sob. My neighbor, Ethan Cole, was crying. At first it felt intrusive to even notice, but there was something raw, something terrifyingly human in that sound, something that pulled me closer rather than pushing me away. I sat there frozen, tea forgotten, heart racing. That was the first night I realized Ethan was carrying a storm inside him. Over the next few days I noticed little things. The way he avoided eye contact, the way he carried grocery bags but never too much food, the way he never answered phone calls but stared at his ringing phone as if it burned him. He seemed like a man who existed but no longer lived. And then one rainy evening, fate decided I should step into his world. I was struggling with my umbrella on the street, when suddenly a hand reached out and steadied it. It was him, Ethan. His voice was deep, gentle but edged with sorrow when he said, "You should hold it closer. The wind here doesn't forgive easily." That was our first real conversation, short but enough for me to see the loneliness etched on his face. I wanted to ask him why he looked like a man always one step away from breaking, but instead I just smiled and said thank you. Days turned into weeks. Our conversations grew from polite greetings to longer exchanges on the staircase. He spoke rarely, but when he did, there was depth in his words, like every sentence was pulled from a place of pain. And then one evening, standing in the hallway, he whispered something I'll never forget. He said, "Do you know what it's like to live with ghosts?" I froze, unsure if he was joking, but his eyes told me otherwise. Before I could reply, he excused himself and vanished into his apartment. That night, I lay awake, replaying his words until sleep finally took me. The very next day, curiosity overcame me. I walked into the little bookstore downstairs, hoping maybe the owner knew something about Ethan. To my surprise, the old man behind the counter sighed and said, "That poor boy. He used to come here with his wife. Sweetest girl you'd ever meet. Isabella Hart was her name. After she passed last year, Ethan's never been the same." Isabella Hart. The name echoed in my head like a bell. Suddenly everything made sense. The sadness in his eyes, the broken piano melodies, the haunting words about ghosts. He wasn't just living with grief. He was drowning in it. And then came the night that changed everything. I couldn't sleep again, and as usual, faint music drifted through the wall. But this time, I didn't just hear piano keys. I heard Ethan's voice whispering her name. Isabella. Isabella? And then silence, followed by the sound of something shattering. Against every bit of logic, I ran to his door and knocked. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time, and when he finally opened, I froze. His eyes were red, his face pale, and in his hand he held a broken picture frame with a photograph of him and Isabella smiling in a sunlit garden. He didn't say a word, but in that moment, I saw him cry, really cry, not just tears but the kind of crying that rips through a person's soul. And I, a stranger who had only just moved in weeks ago, stood there holding my breath, realizing I had stepped into the heart of someone else's grief. That night, standing in Ethan's doorway, something inside me shifted. He wasn't just a neighbor anymore. He was a man holding on to broken pieces, and I had just stepped right into the middle of it. He didn't invite me in, but he didn't close the door either. I whispered softly, "Ethan, are you okay?" His voice cracked as he muttered, "No, but it doesn't matter anymore." Then he sank into the couch, the broken frame still clutched in his trembling hands. I hesitated before stepping inside, my eyes wandering around his apartment. The walls were bare except for a few photographs. But one picture stood out. Ethan and Isabella, laughing with their arms around each other, looking like two people who had the entire world at their feet. The contrast between that photograph and the man sitting in front of me nearly broke me. He didn't speak much, but when he finally did, his words poured like a confession. She was everything. Isabella wasn't just my wife. She was my best friend, my compass, my reason to wake up. And then one rainy night, she was gone. Just like that, an accident. And I wasn't there to save her. His voice cracked into silence, and for a moment, I could feel the weight of his guilt pressing into the room. I wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault, but I knew he wouldn't believe me. From that night on, Ethan and I crossed an unspoken boundary. We weren't just neighbors exchanging polite greetings anymore. I became the silent witness to his pain. Sometimes we'd sit in his apartment in silence, listening to the rain against the windows. Other times, he'd play the piano, broken notes, unfinished melodies, but each one carried the ghost of Isabella. And yet, little by little, I saw flickers of the man he used to be. One evening he laughed, really laughed, at something I said, and for a split second, the darkness in his eyes lifted. It felt like watching the first ray of sun break through after a storm. But grief is a strange thing. Just when you think you're healing, it pulls you back into its depths. One night, I found him sitting by the piano, clutching a bottle, his eyes distant. "Olivia," he whispered, "do you think it's wrong to live again, when someone you loved so much can't?" I froze, unsure how to answer. My voice shook as I replied, "It's not wrong to live, Ethan. Isabella loved you. Don't you think she'd want you to keep going?" His hands tightened around the bottle, his jaw clenched, but his eyes, they softened for the first time. The days that followed were different. He started showing up at the bookstore downstairs, sometimes even reading poetry out loud. He'd help me carry groceries, He'd ask about my day, small things, but they mattered. It felt like I was slowly watching him rebuild, piece by fragile piece. It was late evening, the sky heavy with clouds, when there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Ethan, drenched from the rain, holding a box in his hands. He didn't speak, just walked inside and placed the box on my table. With trembling hands he opened it, and inside were Isabella's letters, dozens of them, tied with a faded ribbon. She used to write to me, even when she was alive. Letters she never gave me. Letters I found after she died. His voice cracked as he pulled one out and began to read. It was Isabella's handwriting, her words speaking of love, of dreams they shared, of hopes for their future. And then the last letter. The one she wrote just a day before she died. Ethan, if you're ever reading this, it means life has been cruel to us. But promise me one thing. Don't stop living. Don't stop loving. Even if I'm not there, let your heart find light again. Promise me you won't drown in my memory. Tears streamed down Ethan's face as he finished reading. And in that moment, I saw him cry again. But this time, it wasn't just grief. It was release. It was love. It was the beginning of letting go. He looked at me with eyes that were no longer just heavy with sorrow, but searching, as if he was trying to believe in a world beyond his loss. And for the first time he whispered, "Thank you for reminding me I'm still here." I don't know what the future holds for Ethan and me. Maybe we'll just remain two neighbors connected by a story of pain and healing. Or maybe, just maybe, fate has written something more for us. But one thing I know for certain. The night I saw him cry, my life changed forever. Because sometimes, the most powerful stories aren't the ones you read in books. They're the ones you live through the broken hearts of others.